The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our guest today, Robin Aisha Landsong, has just returned from a second journey with her husband John to Zimbabwe, where she reunited once again with memories of her horrible experience and the friends who helped save her. Robin is a multiple near-death survivor whose brutal experiences, coupled with her NDE, opened her creativity and empathic knowing. When Robin was 8 years old, an American man abducted her and took her to Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. He eventually abandoned her to another man who wound up abandoning her on the road. Facing certain death, she was fortunately adopted and cared for by the people of a small tribal village, but the danger did not end there. She was shot by a soldier, experienced an incredibly visionary NDE, and once again was forced to escape when the village was attacked. On this show, she continues the story of her personal quest to understand what happened to her there. If you haven't already listened to parts 1 and 2 of Robin's story, including her NDE when she nearly died, I suggest you click on our past shows button at NDE Radio for her interviews of March 6, 2017 and June 5th, 2017. Today, Robin is a visual artist, medicine singer, craniosacral therapist, and health intuitive. She has given many thousands of healing sessions and lives with her husband John in Olympia, Washington. Her beautiful book, Art Inspired by My Death Experience, can be seen on her website. Robin, welcome back to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee. It's so great to hear your voice.
Oh, good to hear yours, too. Well, tell us about your second trip. How long were you there? When did you get back?
That's a great question. So I just looked on the calendar and realized I've only been back for 5 weeks. So that really helps me understand I'm still very much integrating.
Yes.
And so we were there in 5 weeks ago and we were there for 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And it was, a really incredible experience. We found another person who knew me as when I was 8 years old there. And it was amazingly casual connection, actually. She looked at me and she laughed and she said, "Oh, you've grown."
Since you were 8 years old, yes, you would.
Yeah, so since it was in 1977, I'm 50 now. And so I also got to reconnect to Mayamu, whose grandmother is one of the women who saved my life. And it was such a rich connection again. And we talked with her for another hour interview, and we have a translator. She speaks Venda. And again, just filling in more details. And one of the things that I really got more thoroughly this time was that even though the war was 42 years ago, they're still in a unsafe government. And Mugabe went down this past year, or, kind of the last calendar year. But it's still, when there's been a dictatorship for so long, usually it's another dictatorship that comes in. And so some people are willing to tell us and talk to us about that time period, and other people still feel unsafe. And so our research is tricky, one, because, a lot of people died from the war, so some of the key people aren't alive anymore, or they've just died from age. And two, people's willingness to talk about that time period, even now, is tenuous. And I was speaking to, right at the very end, we went to the kind of official office of one of the government agencies, and I asked him very directly, is there any chance we're going to find records of the battle that happened near the village I was in? So we had some historic documentation. And he just looked at me and he said, "Robin, people don't write things down while they're running for their lives." And he said, even if anybody had written anything down, which they wouldn't because their level of danger was so high, they were escaping. But those records would have been destroyed by Mugabe when he came into power. So it's a bit of a challenge in terms of the research, and we really accepted that it has to really come through people. And we went and returned to the hospital where I was actually in South Africa once I'd been taken across the border. And again, we had been there 2 years ago and checked in with her, and she said she would look. And she came back and told us there's not going to be any records before apartheid ended in South Africa, so 1994. She said the records were just destroyed, and during when apartheid ended. And so it's really about trying to find any living people who remember. And I don't get the security. At some point there might be something turning up, but so far in all our efforts to find any written records, there aren't any. And so that's disappointing, because I know that makes it more easy for some people to accept the story. And the direction I've gone is to really research, again, the people and also the effects of trauma, that of course affected myself, and as well as the other people who lived through the war. And so this past year, I've been really diving into, I've gotten trainings with Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, and Peter Levine, who's also one of the leaders in trauma resolution, and about to take another class with Deb Dana, who's about the polyvagal theory. So it's been a really interesting exploration in not just looking at the details of my story in terms of getting documentation, but also just looking at from the whole cause and effect of my whole life and the trauma resolution I've had to do.
Yeah. How has the culture changed there since you were first there at 8 years old? I remember you said that they anointed you with ashes from the fire and rubbed them on your skin and hair, and a woman sang to you and held you as a child. You were frightened at first, but then you felt the strong mothering from her, and you felt very happy there. Now, how is it different today?
That is a perfect lead-in to telling you the highlight of the whole trip. So Myamu is just so affectionate with me, and it's just an incredible thing to, just show up after 40 years and just literally, have her hold me in her arms, and she was a very strong woman. So she, the first reunion we have, which is, just so people know, on my, I do have a video on YouTube, and about 40 minutes into the YouTube video is my reunion with Myamu from 2 years ago. And, we hadn't actually, she knew I was coming, but we literally met each other on the road as I was coming in. Talk about divine arrangements. And she was so strong, she just practically picked me up off the ground. And she checked where the bullet wound was on top of my head. And we purposely had not told anyone where my bullet wound was. And so she had to know that firsthand, which was the first sort of really huge confirmation we had that, she was definitely the right person. So she is just so warm and welcoming. And the idea got going of, why don't we do a ceremony again now that Robin's back? Oh. And so we went to some of the elder healers, which are called Sangamas, and asked them if they would, some of the local people asked, would you be willing to do a ceremony now that Robin is back? She had some as a child when she was with Village 16. And it was a very interesting experience. His name is Indane. And we sat down together, and he and I just looked at each other, two intuitives. We were just looking at each other, energetically checking each other out. Mm. And he felt really wonderful, very clear, very pure, intense. I could feel his connection to the land. I could feel his connection to the ancestors. I could see ancestors through him. And he looked at me for the longest time, and a smile slowly grew across his face. And then he just started laughing in that wonderful smile. And he said, yes, we'll do ceremony with this one, and it will be interesting.
And tell us what happened. through the ceremony?
So we were amazed how many people gathered. It was about 80 people gathered. And, and I knew what I remembered as a child in terms of the drumming and the dancing. And so it was the same. And the drums that were pulled out were old. And somebody pointed out to me, these might still be the same drums that you knew as a child, which was incredibly moving and valuable for me.
Yes.
And so when the opening of the ceremony started, one of the other women, who was a Sangama, her name is Melita, she, pulled me into the center and kind of got me dressed up in different regalia and had me be part of the opening ceremony. And so fortunately, I remembered a little bit from childhood, and also I've been part of Native American ceremonies here in North America. And it was surprisingly similar, so I knew what to do. And in terms of blessing the land and you offer some food to the land first, you're feeding the ancestors. And then the dancing and the drumming began. And I did my best to remember from my childhood how to do the dancing. I just couldn't possibly keep up with the women. They're just so skillful in their dancing. Their feet were just moving so fast. But I did my very best, and I just went full out. And when I really let myself get into it, the women in the circle just howled in laughter. And I turned to somebody who spoke English, and I said, is it because I'm dancing well, I'm dancing badly, or they just haven't seen a grown white woman dance? And she said, probably all of it. So the depth of the celebration, the magnitude of the welcoming back that they gave me was just incredible. And at the end of the ceremony, and I will tell you more about it, Vanessa, who was our host, the closest white people, she kind of pulled me inside and said, Robin, I just want you to know that Digby, her husband, has lived here all his life, and he's never been welcomed into a ceremony, let alone to participate, and that she's lived there for like 20 years. And kind of at best, they were allowed to be off to the side at some distance at the end of the ceremony. And she said to be welcomed into the center is because they know you, and they, these are some of the people that remember you, and they remember the stories about you. So it was an incredible honor to be welcomed right into the center. And so the idea of this particular ceremony is to receive a vision from the ancestors. And so, through the dancing, through the drumming, it kind of puts people into a trance state where they can get opened up. So the portal between the living and those who have crossed over can be opened up. So the communication can happen back and forth. And so I was definitely feeling affected, and being a near-death experiencer, I think I was already born intuitive. I'm much more, going into trance, going into altered state is quite accessible for me. Mm-hmm. And so two of the women in particular just felt very open to me, and one of them I was getting closer and closer to her drum, and I had the feeling like I could dive head forward through the drum, to the realm of the ancestors, to the place of listening. And so they kept encouraging me to get closer and closer. And the beauty and intensity of this woman drumming was so powerful that it did open me up. And I did drop into vision, meaning I literally kind of went down to the ground. They covered me with a cloth. And the vision I received was seeing a metaphor of kind of the collective humanity and a very big thorn in the side of humanity. And what the ancestors said to me is, it is your job as the healing power that we've given you to take that thorn out of the side. And I said, oh, it's so big, I don't know how to do that. And they chided me. They said, you're denying what we've given you. You do have that potency. And they said, put your hand up to the side of the thorn. So in the vision, I did that. I put my hand up, and they said, now back your hand away. And the thorn came with my hand, like as if there was a kind of a connection, a potency, a kind of a magnetism. Mm. And the thorn came out of the side of that metaphorical humanity. And once it was out, it didn't have any potency to harm. And so I asked, well, what is the thorn made of? And I heard it's duality. It's us, them thinking. It's comparison to thinking I'm less than or I'm more than another. And therefore I deserve more or I deserve less. And I realized it was that thorn was the place where we can decide, oh, somebody, if they had abuse, they deserved it. Or if somebody is in poverty, it's not my problem, they deserve it. Or, if I had abuse, it's because I'm less than. And to remove it just brought back equality, brought back humanity in each person, brought back connection, what was more possible, because we are created from the same divine source. And what was really fascinating was the next day we were traveling over to one of the places where I was and hadn't visited already. And we were driving in a very big vehicle and out in the bush. And we stopped to look at this really incredible bird. And I moved my hand on the seat and I got stung by a bee right in the center of my palm. And I was very startled. And then somebody had to help remove, get tweezers out and remove the stinger from the center of my palm. And it took about 10 minutes for it to dawn on me, but I thought, I had to receive help to take out the thorn from the center of my palm.
Yes.
I thought,
wow.
Isn't that interesting? And that the reciprocity of, the healer needs healing, and the places where we're all vulnerable and the places where we're powerful. And so we went back kind of on the way home, and we stopped at one of the homes of the woman Sangama Molita. And I told her, because I had told them my vision, and I said, I just wanted you to know that I was stung in the center of my palm by a bee, and I had to have the thorn removed. And she laughed, and she loved that. And speaking of the generosity of the culture, she dressed us up again in regalia and was like, okay, take pictures. And she dressed up John and Tarquin, who's the son of our host. He's our translator. And so she just had a delightful time, and John and I did a singing medicine for her, and she loved it. So the generosity, and it just strikes me over and over again that the level of racism and economic oppression that these people are living in, and and some people are very angry, and there is hostility, but so many people are so welcoming, so generous. They fed us, and it's just the place in my heart that has so much deep connection to these people. Just really can't understand the systemic and very aggressive racism that comes at them. And just for example, a positive thing, like right when we were on our way to leave, we were in the airport, and the waitress comes up to John and I, and she can't know if we're racist or not. And she walks up to us with this beautiful smile, and she says, "Hello, my lovely family. How are you this evening?" And I thought, for, the racism that she's received, she's still this generous, this open-hearted, and taking this risk. And, of course, it melted our hearts, and we're delighted to be connected to her. So that's really the key that I'm reminded of over and over again, is that they took a risk to save my life as a child. And for those who don't know all the details, when one of the women found me after the attack on my village and I had to run to escape, that she found me the next day, and, again, I was covered with dried blood, and she picked me up and put me on her back and took me back to her homestead. And that was an incredible risk for her. If she was found by the guerrilla soldiers harboring me, then that could have been life-threatening to her family, which, again, we found out more information that might be why my village was attacked, because they were harboring me, a white child. And so when others saw that she was harboring me, they said, "Don't bother with her. It's too dangerous." And she said, "She's a living human being. I won't throw her away." And so in all my sharing my story, all my recovery from my own trauma is about that, about sharing what they did to love bravely, sharing the courage that they took to take a risk to save my life. And what was said to us over and over again, because of the magnitude of danger, because of the number of times, I was shot, that I was shot at, is people said to me over and over again, the only reason that you're alive is because it's God's will, and that you have a mission, and that God, brought you back or saved you because you are the keeper of the story. And because I have American white privilege, I'm going to be able to get my story out in the world and share the love of these people who are, to me, so many of them are the epitome of generosity, and their ability to connect through trauma, beyond trauma, through racism, through economic oppression is just extraordinary. And that's really the crux of my message. It's not about me. And it also is a story about healing trauma. And, just even since I've been back 5 weeks, one of the key pieces that we found in the story that was I had still been repressing was we spoke with somebody who was actually on what would be considered the guerrilla side. And he had a very critical piece of information. He said, Robin, Aisha, you actually had been, the soldiers who picked you up took you to an area that was incredibly dangerous. And there was an argument from the guerrilla soldiers about whether to kill you or whether to help you and take you closer to a border. And as soon as he said that, I started having flashbacks about this argument over me. And it was extremely heated, and it was in Venda, so of course I couldn't understand it. And from my perspective, it ended because my nervous system knew that this was about my life, knew that I was either going to die or live, and that people were extremely angry. And so my nervous system went into full protection, which is called dorsal vagal shutdown. And I literally went unconscious. And so obviously, the person who was advocating to take me closer to the border won. And what this man said is that he was assigned the job to go pick me up and take me closer to the border. But by the time he drove there, a man named Alexander had already taken me. And so I had always remembered a truck ride with a man, but I didn't know where to place it. But now that we had this, somebody else helped me kind of piece it together, that it was Alexander who took me to Village 16, which is right next to the South African border. So again, it's really through the interviews of people who were there at the time that are helping me piece together more of the history. And,
yes.
And just to be, full disclosure, fully honest, just knowing that I was going to talk about this, last night when I was going to sleep, my body was reliving some of that trauma, and I was shaking, my whole belly was trembling, my heart was racing. And so these are what it takes to heal trauma, is to go from numb, to go from repressed, to go from having to block it out, to allowing the body to remember, to allowing the body to let it come forth. And that often looks like shaking, it often looks like trembling, it often does look like letting the disturbance arrive, feeling the feelings, and then getting to the resolution. And so that's what I do in helping people heal for trauma. Is that I've been a sacral therapist for 16 years. And then I also need my help in the more pieces. I've done, the majority of my healing from trauma, but obviously I still continue in that journey. So later on today, I have a session for myself to help myself and receive a service from somebody else to continue that work. And so really to get across to my brother and sister trauma survivors who, most all of us have had something difficult in our lives or will have something difficult. And my message is it's okay to allow that to surface, to come through, so we can get to the peace, so we can regain our ability to connect to others. because that's what trauma messes with, is our ability to connect to ourselves, connect to our body, connect to others, to animals, to the land, and that I want everyone to feel alive, to feel free in their ability to connect with others. And so that's very much part of my mission. And so much so that it's kind of sparked that I'm going to write another book called When We Need a Miracle, to go from numb to being able to connect. And that's part of why I've really dove into so much reading and doing trainings with some of the best leaders in trauma resolution, because I want all of us to feel available to ourselves, to do our mission, to love and connect in the ways that make life just beautiful and worth living.
Yes. Speaking of books, has your book come out yet?
Not yet. I gave it out to a New York agent in about February and get some very hard feedback. And because, just that's the way the world of publishing works. But it did spark me to want to write the book about healing trauma. And so that's kind of what I'm focusing on right now. My thought right now is I'm going to bring out the book about healing trauma first and then bring out my memoir. I'm not totally set on that plan, but I'm also just really, having been back, I'm really much in a resting cycle and integrating. Like I said, I'm still integrating this piece that I was in the hands of the guerrilla soldiers, and they had this argument over whether to help me live or to end my life. So I'm just letting that percolate for myself.
What an insight that must be for understanding race relations in this country, say from the black perspective, because you were the minority that was hated in Rhodesia.
Yeah.
And you even as an 8-year-old child, you for some of them, you symbolized everything that was wrong in their lives.
Yeah.
And you can understand the intensity of why some of them would want to kill you under those circumstances.
Right. Yeah. I'm the daughter of the oppressor. I'm the one who took their land. I'm the one, that's what I represented. And that's also very much the integration that happens when I go back is, even Digby, who's lived there all his life, he said, if I were a black man in this country at that time, I would have taken up arms also. And, and this is a man whose farm was taken, some of their home was destroyed. And he gets it. He gets that, generational oppression does result in desperate anger, and economic oppression does result in extreme measures. And so when we look at non-hating, we need to look at social justice. We need to look at economic equality. We need to look at the generations before. And so when I go, of course, I want to be safe and not expose myself to anyone who's hateful, but to look at it in a larger context instead of just individual relationships or just even looking at it in one time period, but to look at it for the past 100 years. So that's a really important part also why I'm sharing my story and writing my books is to really raise those questions like how can we truly include people in economic equality.
Yes. Robin, we're just about out of time. So take a moment to tell the audience how they can find your art and your writing and maybe your speaking schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my website is my name, robinlandsong.com. So it's ROBIN. Landsong is just like the two words, land, LANDSONG.com. And so my artwork is on there. A lot of it's inspired from my near-death experience. And I also do distance healing sessions and in-person healing sessions, so people can sign up for a distance healing session. And I'm working on it as far as my books. I'm just letting it really come through, divine inspiration.
I'm glad to hear about your new idea for a book, but I am anxious to see your memoir. That's I'm sure many people are looking forward to that.
Yeah, and just really I want it to be the best it can be, so I'm not rushing it. I've worked on it for a decade. It took that long to really bring all the memories into a cohesive story. And so, kind of I'm being very un-American. I'm not rushing. And
Robin, thanks so much. Just to say that we are out of time, and I want to thank you for being on NDE Radio once again. If listeners would like to hear this or any of our past shows, just go to our website, NDE Radio, and hit the past shows button. And for more information about IANDS, just go to their website at IANDS.org. And be with us again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.